Welcome to the Anderson and Lindhardt Show, episode 21. Today we read from the book Man's Search for Meaning, written by Viktor Frankl. The topics we discuss are heavy in nature but are extremely important. The format of the podcast goes as follows. We read excerpts from the book and then discuss the ideas and principles taught. We are very excited to release this one and know that there is so much value to be drawn from it. Thank you for all your support and God bless.
All right, welcome back, Anderson and Lindhardt Nation. We're excited to be here with you for episode 21. So
21.
It's a big number, good number. So we're excited to share some of our thoughts with you. It's kind of cool. We both kind of had similar feelings that we wanted to have a more spiritual guided conversation, and so we're excited to be able to kind of have that type of conversation with you guys, and hopefully be able to help you out and try and help you interact with us a little bit and be able to help you learn and grow in some different ways than maybe we've talked about before.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point that, as you said, we both, had this idea to talk about this. I would like to kind of let people know how we think of topics, and it's very unorthodox. It's not like we're having brainstorming meetings. I mean, sometimes we'll call each other and be like, hey, any ideas? But typically it's just we both have the intention, we're both on the same page that, hey, be thinking throughout your days what we could talk about on a podcast. And then usually, I would say more often than not, we just hop on a call before we start recording and we'll just kind of give some of our thoughts. And sometimes it's like Carter will be thinking we should talk about this, and I'll be thinking we'll talk about this, and we'll kind of discuss and decide which one to talk about. But I just read Man's Search for Meaning this week. I just finished it this morning, and so I was kind of thinking it's a very spiritual book, and I was kind of thinking I wanted to share passages from here and talk about some of the spiritual principles. And then Carter said, this week I've been thinking that we should kind of have a more spiritually centered conversation. So it's just I thought that was cool. Our minds were headed in the same direction, and we're in sync. And so that's what we're going to do. For anyone who doesn't know what this book is, it's written by Viktor Frankl. He is a psychologist in the 20th century. And he was a prisoner in the concentration camps.
Did he live in Germany? Or was he in
I can't remember where he was born. I know he said it in the beginning of the book, like where he was living.
Deutschland.
But I know he was between Poland and Germany because like he was in Auschwitz for a long time, which is in Poland, but he was also in some other smaller camps that, you don't really hear of. Like everyone knows of Auschwitz, but it's like there was tons of camps,
right? And
some of them were even worse than Auschwitz. But he was between a lot of camps during World War II. And he was a psychologist, and so he was able to.
Was he a psychologist before?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I got a good one, like an experienced one. He studied a lot. He even, cool story. I don't want to get ahead of myself because I don't want to just start diving into it yet, because there's some spiritual principles that I want to bring up first before I get into like
lay the foundation.
Yeah. Because the question I first had when I heard about this book like 4 or 5 years ago. So it's been a long time coming that I've been wanting to read it. And my question was, well, what is the thing or things that gives life a life meaning? Like even in a concentration camp, you could have meaning. What did it for you? And so I want to get into that, but I don't want to start with that. What I kind of want to start with is kind of what happened with you and with our minds being on the same page. And that's, I guess you could say, like synchronicities or divine orbits, things like that principle, because he opens up the book saying that they knew the Nazis were going to come through their town and they were going to round up all the Jews and take them to the camps. They knew that was coming soon. And his visa to go to the United States was ready. He got the letter in the mail that said, hey, come down to the whatever office. You can come pick up your visa and you can leave. Like you can get out of here before the Nazis come, and you can go to the States and you'll be fine. And he was in his hometown. His parents still lived there. And he was kind of watching over his parents, and he felt a responsibility to his parents. And so he was really wrestling with, do I go get my visa and leave, or do I stay in my hometown with my parents knowing that we're going to go get, taken to a concentration camp? And so he was wrestling with this idea like over and over and over. And I would like to read it in his words. But he tells this really, really cool story that I'll read in his words. It's just a few paragraphs.
Well, while you're pulling that up, it's just like another kind of cool divine orbit is like, for me, this, like, I don't know why, but like learning about, I think it's World War II is when this is all happening, right?
Yeah, this is World War II.
It's like World War II and like Germany and in concentration camps and just kind of what was going on in the world is like my favorite. Like, okay, I love studying about Egypt. Like, that's really cool. But it's like Egypt in this war is just something that I love. I don't love studying about it because it's all happy and super like whatever. But it's just like for some reason, there's just something inside of me that just like loves learning more about this. And so like I wouldn't say I'm like crazy knowledgeable about it, but I know like a pretty good amount of like things that happen and stories and just like kind of what was going on in the time period. So it's just kind of cool that you just read a book about that. And that's like one of my favorite things to learn about. So
dude, then you would, this is a really exciting
I probably would
book.
like the book then.
And like I said, I mean, this is part 2. So it's like, this is just part 1. And that's the original. It's just his story of being in the camps, and it's only 93 pages. And so if you want to get the book and just read the first 93 pages, that's the original book. The part 2 is something kind of, it's his theory of this psychological practice he kind of pioneered. But anyways, yeah, you would love this book. It's amazing. And in school, I thought I didn't like stuff like this because the teachers were so boring. Like, I don't understand how they expect a teenager to sit in school for 7 hours a day and actually listen while you have the most boring teacher up there. So anyways, I've learned I love to read and I love to learn. But anyways, so I do want to, so I'll just read it like I said. Anyways, so he's setting up the story. He's saying, I'm wrestling between it. And he said, I needed a hint from heaven. So he used that phrase. And then he said, the reader may ask me why I did not try to escape what was in store for me after Hitler had occupied Austria. So that's where he's from. Let me answer by recalling the following story. Shortly before the United States entered World War II, I received an invitation to come to the American consulate in Vienna to pick up my immigration visa. My old parents were overjoyed because they expected that I would soon be allowed to leave Austria. I suddenly hesitated, however. The question beset me. Could I really afford to leave my parents alone to face their fate, to be sent sooner or later to a concentration camp or even to a so-called extermination camp? Where did my responsibility lie? Should I foster my brainchild, logotherapy? Logotherapy is he was writing this theory of this new psychological practice, and he had the manuscript written. He was going to publish the book, things like that. So that's his brainchild. Like that's one of his like purposes in his life. And now people, psychologists and psychiatrists, use principles from logotherapy in their practices today. So where did my responsibility lie? Should I foster my brainchild, logotherapy, by emigrating to fertile soil where I could write my books? Or should I concentrate on my duties as a real child, the child of my parents who had to do whatever he could to protect them? I pondered the problems this way and that, but could not arrive at a solution. This was the type of dilemma that made one wish for a hint from heaven, as the phrase goes. It was then that I noticed a piece of marble lying on a table at home. When I asked my father about it, he explained that he had found it on the site where the National Socialists had burned down the largest Viennese synagogue. He had taken the piece home because it was a part of the tablets on which the Ten Commandments were inscribed. One gilded Hebrew letter was engraved on the piece. My father explained that this letter stood for one of the commandments. Eagerly, I asked, "Which one is it?" He answered, "Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land." At that moment, I decided to stay with my father and my mother upon the land and to let the American visa lapse.
Dang.
And so that's the foreword of the book. That's
I
how
like
he opens
as soon as you said that there was like commandments on, I was like, I guarantee you it's honor thy mother and thy father.
Yeah. And So that's how the book opened, and I was like, whoa. I mean,
Things starting with the faith building experience.
and so there's at least one other little passage I'd like to read that is along that same line. But do you have any thoughts that pop up about that principle
Yeah.
of like air quotes coincidences?
Well, you said you called him a hint from heaven.
Yeah, that's what he called it in the book, which I loved that. It's like I
Yeah.
needed a hint from heaven.
I think like I think we all need that at some point or another. Like just like these little moments from God that just keep you going. Like I don't know about you, but like on my mission, like Heavenly Father would push me to the brink, and then he would give me a little hint from heaven or a little tender mercy to keep me going. Like, and it could have been like two or three a day where I was gonna lose it before lunch if I didn't like get one. Um, but he always gave me one just enough to keep going. And I think like he never like gave me experiences where it was just like crazy, like very few, like where it was just like it's gonna carry you for like a week or 2 or 3 weeks. It
Yeah.
was more so like we would be like driving home and we would be jamming out, and it was just like a cool little moment. You're like, all right, I can be a missionary for another day, and it's just like, all right, I can keep going. And I feel like for me, like those are kind of the purpose of those hints from heaven is not necessarily like we had talked about, like very few times are there realizations that you come to that just change your whole life. More so it's just going to be like, all right, I'm going to remind myself in 30 minutes to keep going kind of deal. And so I feel like that's kind of the purpose of those hints from heavens or divine orbits, is just to be like, remind you that God's in charge, that he's there, and to keep going, and that if he's in charge, obviously whatever happens is part of his plan. And so I just kind of like that phrase. I'd never really heard it before, but
Yeah, I
probably
hadn't
will
either.
be implementing it into my seminary teaching, because I think it's kind of like a, I don't know. I love when you're able to find a principle. It's like when people like have like an illness and they're able to put a name to it, all of a sudden they know what they're attacking, and it
Yeah.
makes it a lot easier to be able to overcome it. It's kind of
Mhm.
like the same thing. It's like, all right, now I can put a name to that. Like, my seminary students, it's like when they have those experiences, like, oh, it's a hint from heaven. So that those are just kind of my initial thoughts, and I'm sure more will come to mind. But I really like that phrase.
Yeah, I loved it too. And I had similar thoughts to yours that a hint from heaven can either be like those little, I think about it like, I don't know, Mario Kart or something. Like if you're ever playing Mario Kart and someone had like dropped a mushroom, I forget how that happens, but sometimes there's just a little mushroom chilling
If
on the
they get hit by
racetrack.
a shell and all
That's
of a
right.
sudden they lose it,
And it'll just sit on the track. And if you hit it, it like boosts you forward. Um, and that's kind of how my mind sees it.
dude, that's good. I like
So
that.
I'll just see like you're driving, you're starting to get kind of tired or whatever, or worn out, and then boom, you hit a little mushroom, and it doesn't propel you to go 3 laps. It propels you, a little bit, and you have
It's not a
to,
rainbow star,
yeah, or it's not the golden, it's
the
not a
golden
star, the golden
mushroom.
mushroom. Where it's like,
You
but
can't even control it, but you're just like going
yeah,
all
you're just like, um, anyways, so that's kind of how my mind sees it. But I also like the what in his case the hint from heaven was, well, I have two directions I can go. They're I would be very cautious to label any. If you have two paths in front of you, don't label one good or bad. They're
Mhm.
just, it's, I can go to America and write my books, or I can stay with my parents and take care of them. It's like you just have two options. It's not good or bad. It's just which one should I do right now in my life. And it's like sometimes you need a hint from heaven, and they're often there. And the point I wanted to make, and I want this to be clear, is that you need to have your eyes open so you see the hint.
Yeah, because he was looking for it.
He was looking for the hint, and then because he was looking for it, I believe, he had some inclination to ask what the marble, the rock was. Dad, what's that rock? I've seen it before, but what is it? And it's like if he wasn't looking, his brain wouldn't be helping him out, or his spirit in a more spiritual sense wouldn't be helping him out. And so
Well, real quick, it
keep your
goes
eyes
back
open
to what we were talking about when you have an aim in life, which is something that your book talks a little bit about.
a lot about.
Everything starts to like we talked about goals. When you have a goal in mind, everything that starts to happen in your life starts to revolve around that goal. And so like if he didn't have the aim of being like, I'm trying to look for a hint from heaven, he might have just saw the rock or whatever and not even seen anything special
Exactly.
about it and just moved on. But he had that aim, which inspired him to ask the question, which inspired him to get to his answer. So
Yeah. And then I would like to share a brief personal experience that happened to me this week, because I've been, my spiritual eyes have been, they were never closed this past year, but they've been reopening wider than they have been in the past 6 months or so. So I've been able to see these little hints from heaven more. And so here's an example. I usually don't eat lunch at work. I usually just skip it because I can just work 5 hours and get the freak out of there. And so
you're like, I'd rather hang out with my wife.
yeah, I'm like, I'd rather go eat a leftovers from my fridge with my wife than go out to eat with you guys, even though I love you guys. But my desk buddy, who he started with me the same day, so we've been really close. His name's Nick, and he had no intentions of going to lunch that day. I had no intentions of going to lunch that day. I think it was Wednesday or Thursday, but anyways, a bunch of the dudes went into the conference room where everyone eats lunch, and there's an 80-inch screen in there, and they were watching NFL highlights, and Nick and I just needed a break because we were just kind of having at least I was having a rough time. I had like 35 calls and no sales yet, so I was like, man, this sucks. And so we went and sat in there, we were watching NFL highlights. It was just like greatest of all time highlights, like just a good time, and just kind of, easing the pressure a little bit. And then Nick said, Reiss, do you just want to go to lunch? And there's a sandwich place down the street where if Nick and I go to lunch, it's rare, but we'll usually just go there because we can just walk, get it quick, and we're done in 30 minutes. We don't have to spend a lot of time. So we walk there. It's a block away. We walk there. We walk in. The lady says, hey guys, are you ready to order? We're like, yeah. And she's like, just so you know, it's a 20 to 25-minute wait. And we were like, oh, that's okay. Like, we'll just go somewhere else. And there's not a lot of other places right close to work. And we didn't
25-minute wait for a
for a
sandwich,
sandwich, bro. I was like, all right, I'm out of here. Like, it wasn't even a question. We were just like, nope. And so we were like, Nick was like, what do you want? And I was like, I don't want anything heavy. Just, I'm really particular with what I eat. So usually when I eat out, I'll just go to a sandwich place because it's a lot better option. And I was like, the closest Jimmy John's is on 12th Street, and that's like 10-minute drive away. So that's 20 minutes of driving, 10 minutes at the store getting the sand, like whatever.
right?
And so he's like, well, there's a Weber State store right below our building, and they sell crepes and they sell savory ones, So I was like, oh yeah, let's go check it out. So we walk in there. They had savory crepes, got like a turkey, bacon, avocado one. And Nick ordered first and then went into the store, like where it has, Weber State merchandise. And I walked in there and he was talking to to a set of elders. And so I walked up, I was like, oh, hey, elders, what's up? Started to get to know them. Our crepes were being made, so we were just making small talk with them. And I'm like, where are y'all from? The first one was like, oh, I'm from Maryland. And I was like, oh, cool, that's right by my mission. I served in Virginia. I just said Virginia because I'm trying to share with what I have in common with this kid. And then I'm like, where are you from, elder? And he said, oh, I'm from North Carolina. And I was like, okay, because I served in North Carolina too.
Yeah.
So I asked him what part, and he said, oh, Eastern. Because typically when people are from North Carolina, they're from like Raleigh and West,
right?
Like Chapel Hill, Raleigh, and then like Charlotte. And so not a lot of people know Eastern. And
like before my mission, I couldn't tell you any cities on the eastern side of North Carolina, and I love North Carolina. So
yeah, it's like most people know like Greensboro and Chapel Hill and Raleigh, and then West. And so he said, oh,
like heard
Eastern.
of the Outer Banks.
Yeah, you've heard of the Outer Banks because they're famous, but other than that, it's like you can't name any cities. And I was like, no way. I was like, what part? And he said, oh, it's a city called Greenville. And I was like, dude, Greenville, like that. I served in that stake for almost 11 months of my mission. I know the stake president. I've been to Greenville a million times. That's where one of our exchange hubs was. I blah, 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 blah. And he's like, oh, President Walker, and he set me apart. And I'm like, no way. Like he was my first stake president out in the mission and things like that. And so it was really, really cool to be just going off with this kid. And then here's the really cool part. I turned to the other elder and I just had this random thought pop into my head. He told me he was going home in August And so I just had this random thought pop into my head. I said, are you going to come back to Utah? Which is like, he's born and raised in Maryland. And I just had this,
Mm-hmm.
are you going to come back to Utah? And he said, yeah, actually, I'm going to Utah State. And I said, oh, cool. I'm from Logan. Like, I grew up 5 minutes off campus. I know that campus so well. I love it. And then I said, my dad's a bishop up there at the YSA right now. And he said, oh, who's your dad? And I said, oh, Bishop Lindhardt. There's like 100 bishops on the
Mm-hmm.
USU YSA. I was like, oh, Bishop Lindhardt. He said, dude, I served in Bishop Lindhardt's stake for 15 months and I know your dad really well. And I even have gotten to know your brother Ryan
While
really
he was
well.
a missionary.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was like, what? And so when I walked out from that experience, and I texted my dad and Ryan, and they're like, oh yeah, we know Elder White, he's sweet, like he's going home soon and we loved him, whatever. And I just thought, if there wasn't a 30-minute wait for sandwiches, that would have never happened. And if we would have just had this bad attitude of like, let's just skip it or whatever, but it's like, well, let's, we had a problem solving mentality and we solved our problem. And then that divine orbit happened. And it was just one of those little like hints from heaven where I thought, dang, that was no coincidence that the sandwich place, which we usually go there, and it's usually 5-10 minutes max. And this is the one time it's a 25-minute wait, is the very time that these exact elders were in this exact place at this exact time, and you just start breaking it down like that. And to me, it's just too divine to call that anything else but
I think
a
it
hint from
changes your
heaven.
perspective on opposition when those experiences happen. Cause like obviously it's like really cool when it happens like immediately. Like, oh, we had a opposition, we couldn't go to the normal sandwich shop. So we went and 25 minutes later, you're having a spiritual experience, but you're like, that's how God works on grand scheme of things too. So it's
Yeah,
like
good point.
when it doesn't happen quite immediately, obviously it's like a lot harder to be like, dang, that was kind of stupid. Like our lunch just got wasted or whatever. But
Yeah.
it's like, that there's like those purposes behind, every little thing. And so like for me, when you have those experiences, it changes your perspective on opposition big time, because you're like, all right, I know like that wasn't meant to happen type of deal, versus just like you said, having a bad attitude and being like, well, that was stupid.
Yeah, and putting the blinders on. It's like, keep your eyes open and be willing to adapt, because that's when good things happen. And I like that you brought up that point, because a lot of times it's not going to happen immediately after, but you just have to remind yourself. I like to sometimes play with the idea that when something bad happens, and I mean that like the sandwich shop has a 30-minute wait, but all the way to something more severe, to just think, okay, something good is coming now. And maybe that's a naive way of thinking, but I don't think so, because I think I even, I believe in an afterlife. I believe that in some cases that good won't come until the afterlife, and that kind of sucks. But at
Yeah.
the same time, it's like, how beautiful though. But I do believe a lot of the good will come right back to you in this life, and you will be able to experience it sooner than later. Um, but anyways, I want to get into the book a little bit more. I kind of want to read just a few short passages that are kind of heavy.
Okay.
Reason I want to do so is so that you can kind of get some context about what this guy was going through, and him and his friends and family. Um, First off, when the train pulled up to Auschwitz, they got off the train, and the SS guard who was in charge, would look at you and say, "You go that way, you go into that line, you go into that line, you go into that line." And they had women and men, and the guard were saying, "You go left, you go right, you go left." And what they were doing is they were looking at them, and if they looked healthy enough to work, they said go there, and if they looked too weak, they said go there. And the weak ones went straight to the crematorium and were burned that very hour. And the strong ones went into the camp. And Viktor said to one of the guards, "Where did um, all my friends and family just go?" And he
Is that
pointed
the
up.
guy writing the book?
Yeah, Viktor
Okay.
Frankl. Viktor said, "Oh, where did they go?" And the guard pointed up to all this black smoke billowing out of a building, and he said, "They're floating up into the heavens right now," with it sarcastically.
Right.
And um, yeah, so I wanted to read just a few passages to kind of give you an idea of what this is like. He talks about how there was 3 psychological stages of camp life. Stage 1 was shock, obviously.
Right. Someone says that to you and you're like, I don't even know how you process that.
And they literally took everything from them. The very first, they go in there, they have to go into this hut. It's freezing cold outside. Germany, Poland, Austria. I mean, it's like northern Utah. It's freezing in the winter. And this was late fall, almost winter, so it's freezing outside. They strip them naked and then they give them just basically rags for clothes that the prisoners had worn before them, so they're covered in feces and lice and what have you, just horrible. And so they literally take everything from them. And so stage 1 of camp life is shock. Stage 2 is apathy, so just no feeling towards anything anymore. And so he's wanted to explain the apathy he was feeling with a story. So this is just like 3 paragraphs. He said, I spent some time in a hut for typhus patients who ran very high temperatures and were often delirious, many of them moribund. Weird word, don't know what it means. After one of them had just died, I watched without any emotional upset the scene that followed, which was repeated over and over again with each death. One by one, the prisoners approached the still warm body. One grabbed the remains of a messy meal of potatoes. Another decided that the corpse's wooden shoes were an improvement on his own and exchanged them. A third man did the same with the dead man's coat, and another was glad to be able to secure some, just imagine, genuine string for their shoes. All this I watched with unconcern. Eventually, I asked the nurse, he says that in air quotes because they're not really a nurse, it's just someone who's assigned to be a nurse.
Right.
All this I watched with unconcern. Eventually, I asked the nurse to remove the body. When he decided to do so, he took the corpse by its legs, allowing it to drop into the small corridor between the 2 rows of boards, which were the beds for the 50 typhus patients, and dragged it across the bumpy earthen floor toward the door. The two steps which led up into the open air always constituted a problem for us, since we were exhausted from a chronic lack of food. After a few months' stay in the camp, we could not walk up those steps, which were about 6 inches high, without putting our hands on the door jambs to pull ourselves up. The man with the corpse approached the steps. Wearily, he dragged himself up, then the body, first the feet, then the trunk, and finally, with an uncanny rattling noise, the head of the corpse bumped up the 2 steps. My place was on the opposite side of the hut, next to the small sole window, which was built near the floor. While my cold hands clasped a bowl of hot soup from which I sipped greedily, I happened to look out the window. The corpse, which had just been removed, stared in at me with glazed eyes. 2 hours before I had spoken to that man. Now I continued sipping my soup. If my lack of emotion had not surprised me from the standpoint of professional interest, I would not remember this incident now because there was so little feeling involved in it. There's one other one. I think it's 29. This one's a little bit shorter. I shall never forget how I was roused one night by the groans of a fellow prisoner who threw himself about in his sleep, obviously having a horrible nightmare. Since I had always been especially sorry for people who suffered from fearful dreams or deliria, I wanted to wake the poor man. Suddenly, I drew back the hand which was ready to shake him, frightened at the thing I was about to do. At that moment, I became intensely conscious of the fact that no dream, no matter how horrible, could be as bad as the reality of the camp which surrounded us, and to which I was about to recall him. Yeah.
So you said step 2, or not step 2, or like phase 2 is apathy.
Yeah.
Okay.
So like he said with that story of the dead body, which was taken out and was laid right outside the window, which he could directly see the person while he's just eating his soup. And by the way, the soup they gave them was pretty much just water with a little bit of broth in it. He had no feeling. And he said, if it wasn't for my professional interest as like a psychologist, where I was interested of like, I wonder why I don't feel anything. That's weird. I usually should be like, holy crap, there's a dead person next to me. But he's just like, oh. And he's like, if it wasn't for my professional interest, I wouldn't have even remembered that, because it just wasn't an emotional experience. Because you remember high emotional experiences, whether they're good or bad. And typically, I mean, if you and I saw a dead body, we would remember it perfectly well. But he's like, no, like we wouldn't even remember that. So I just wanted to read those two passages just to give you an idea of, I mean, what this is. And a lot of the work sites that he gets transferred to a Bavarian camp. I think that's a town. I believe it's in Poland. I could be wrong though, but they are doing this work in the forest where they're digging trenches, and I believe they're digging trenches for the war. And so the camp guards wake them up extremely early in the morning before sunrise, and they march them several kilometers. He doesn't specify how much, but several kilometers to the work site in the forest where they're digging the trench. And it's winter, and so they don't give them shovels, they give them pickaxes. And at 10 to 10:30, bell sounds, and it's lunch break, and each person gets 3 to 5 ounces of bread. And then they work until dark, and then they march them several kilometers
That's
back
like 4
to the
5
huts.
pieces of sacrament bread.
Yeah, it's hardly anything. And meanwhile, if you get caught slacking off, he literally said, like, one time I can't remember exactly, but one time he stopped marching for literally, he said, like 4 seconds, like I was noticing something, and next thing I know, I got hit on the back of the head with a club. And he said it wasn't the physical pain that hurt me, it was the fact that I was treated as if I wasn't a human being. That's what hurt me. And anyways, remember, most of them, if they have shoes, they don't fit. They are not warm at all. They're just piece of crap sneakers. Most of them don't have laces. And some men are in bare feet, and they're marching on the icy ground for several kilometers, there and back every day. And then they get back to their huts, and some huts had a little stove area where they could put some sticks on there and have some warmth, but most didn't. And he said one time he was in a hut that had one of those little stoves, and they were warming up next to it, and a guard came in and dumped all the source of flame onto the ground and stomped it out and left. And so I wanted to read this one passage, which is still going along with a hint from heaven, I guess. Let me find it real fast.
While you're finding that, I think, and we've talked about this a lot, even like when I was up at your guys' house last time, and we were watching the video about the girl that escaped North Korea or whatever. And
I ordered that book.
You did?
So I should get it. It takes a month to get here for some reason, so it should be here next week. Anyway, okay. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, it just like, I mean, I don't know of any, but I don't think very many people in the United States are waking up as that's their reality. Maybe to a certain extent, that is, like I've met people where, they just grow up around, in the streets, and they see people get killed and stuff like that, and they don't have a whole lot of food. But I think a good amount of people in the United States, that is not the reality of mass. Is it genocide or genocide?
Genocide.
I can't pronounce words, but I just think it makes you grateful, and it gives you a different perspective on your problems.
Yeah,
are a little bit different. And so when you start to complain, like even like start to complain about politicians, or you start to complain about the way that certain people are treated, or whatever it might be, inequality, like all this stuff, you kind of like take a step back and be like, okay, like we're not we're not at that point yet. We're actually doing all right,
Doing
and so
really,
like
really good.
it gives you a different perspective to be like a little bit more grateful on either side of the spectrum, and being like, okay, like we're doing all right. Like, let's just take a step back, show a little bit of gratitude. Obviously, life isn't perfect, but I think for me, just when you hear things like that, it's like, okay, like let's be a little bit grateful. Like I'm like, I have like 50, 60 pairs of shoes, and I should be a little bit more. I mean, I am grateful for them, but just, being like, all right, like these people didn't even have like one good pair. So,
And in fact, they had to, upon arrival of the camp, the guards take your shoes and they give you a crappy pair that's been hand-me-down through 30 other prisoners. And if you're a size 9 and they throw a 12 at you, that's what you get. And if it doesn't have any laces, that's what you get. And if it has holes on the bottom, that's what you get. And if you say anything, you get whipped. They had whips. They would whip you. So real fast, this goes along with gratitude. He's talking about how he would daydream and have conversations with his wife in his head a lot while he worked. He said it would get him through the work. And so on that idea of them having daydreams, he said, he also talked about other things they daydreamed about. He said, this intensification of inner life helped the prisoner find a refuge from the emptiness, desolation, and spiritual poverty of his existence by letting him escape into the past. When given free rein, his imagination played with past events, often not important ones, but minor happenings and trifling things. His nostalgic memory glorified them, and they assumed a strange character. Their world and their existence seemed very distant, and the spirit reached out for them longingly. In my mind, I took bus rides, unlocked the front door of my apartment, answered my telephone, switched on the electric lights. Our thoughts often centered on such details, and these memories could move one to tears. And so I wake up in the morning and my routine is I go flip the lights on so I can start waking up. And
Right.
most mornings I don't think anything of it. And them thinking about turning the lights on literally would bring them to tears. Or unlocking your apartment or your house, or you're getting in your car. It's like, these are the things they daydreamed about. They weren't daydreaming about concerts and all these amazing high positive emotional experiences. They were daydreaming about laying in a warm bed or having small talk with their partner. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to point that out on gratitude, man. If you aren't grateful to live in this country, and I really mean this with all my heart, if you are not grateful to live in this country right now, then you are at very least half blind, if not more. You're blind. And I hate the argument of, so you're saying this country's perfect? And I'm like, oh my gosh, like we're not even going to get into that, because we live in an imperfect existence. In fact, no system in the telestial kingdom can be perfect. It just cannot. In fact, when Christ comes, our belief is it's going to be a terrestrial, where perfection can actually stand. And what happened when, according to the scriptures, when one civilization did reach perfection, what happened? They left they couldn't even, it doesn't exist. So it's like, guys, these guys are daydreaming about turning a light switch on. And what are you complaining about? And so I was reading this book, and I tend
Even
to
like,
be sorry, what?
I was just gonna say, like, and we don't have to like, this is just the example that comes to mind, but like a lot of people complain about, bad cops or whatever, and there are bad cops out there, but then you look at those guards and those cops and those people, and it's like they're hitting you in the back of the head with a club for not marching right. And it's like, no, none of the, like, just like, it just takes a different perspective of being like, okay, like I understand, like there are bad cops out there, there probably are racist cops out there, whatever it might be, but it's like, even those, I mean, yeah, anyways, it's just like, okay, like I'm a little bit more grateful for the police officers that we have, even if he's grumpy when he pulls me over, or even if he's like, you know fat eating a donut and whatever, you know, not doing his job.
Yeah.
But it's like, at least he's not like actively like trying to just not even treat me like a human anyway. So it's just,
Yeah.
it just is like a little bit of a perspective change. And like you said, yeah, it's not perfect. Like, yeah, there are bad people out there that maybe do have ill intentions, but for the most part, we don't have like all of those guys, all of those officers, like we're just pretty bad people. And so it just is kind of
Yeah.
crazy.
And I'll remember that point, because I want to circle back to it, because at the end of the book, he's talking about the third stage of the psychological journey, I guess, of somebody in a concentration camp. And he talks about the good guards. He talks about the good foremen. The foremen were the people who would look after them while they were working. And he said most of them were just so mean. But he talks about a few of them who would save extra bread and give it to them in secret while they're working. He talks about how there was some camp members who were extremely selfish and would do anything to survive. So his point is you can never just identify a group as this. And what happens when you group identify? Hitler identified Jews as a group. That's what and it's like people will say, well, that's extreme. It's like, no, that's not extreme. Everywhere where group identification has happened, that's where it's ended. The Soviet Union had tons of concentration camps, similar outcome. You know, Nazi Germany, they get a group of people and then they shame them, they guilt them. And so that's why I have a problem with this whole talk about white privilege and group, this idea of group guilt. It's not a good idea. And to say that all white people are this, or all black people are this, or all Christians are this, it's an absurd idea, because it's like what the scriptures say. It says it in Paul's writings. Joseph Smith sees it in the Doctrine and Covenants. The glory of the stars in the telestial realm differ. The glory of the stars in the terrestrial and the celestial are all the same. So the glory, were the stars in the telestial kingdom. Everyone's glory is different. We're all completely different. And so to have this idea, and it's an ideology, to say all white people are like this, or all males are like this, or all black people are like this, or all Asians or Christians or people in academia, or blue collar, it doesn't matter what group you're identifying. You can't group identify, because there were some SS guards who were trying their very hardest to help as many people as they could. And on the contrary, there was SS guards who actually found pleasure, which is kind of weird. They found pleasure in hurting people and in treating these people like dirt. And then there were some who were just kind of indifferent, who were just doing what they were told. And so there's differing glory. And so we'll get back to that. There's a small passage in the end that I'll read on that, but I wanted to read this story. This one actually moved me to tears. It was really touching. Anyways, this kind of goes along with everything we've been talking about. Another time we were at work in a trench. The dawn was gray around us. Gray was the sky above, gray the snow in the pale light of dawn, gray the rags in which my fellow prisoners were clad, and gray their faces. I was again conversing silently with my wife. Or perhaps I was struggling to find the reason for my sufferings, my slow dying. In a last violent protest, sorry, someone was just trying to call me. In my last violent protest against the hopelessness of imminent death, I sensed my spirit piercing through the enveloping gloom. I felt it transcend that hopeless, meaningless world, and from somewhere I heard a victorious yes, an answer to my question of the existence of an ultimate purpose. At that moment, a light was lit in a distant farmhouse, which stood on the horizon as if painted there in the midst of the miserable gray of a dawning morning in Bavaria. And then he, I believe this is German, but he says a phrase in German that means, and the light shineth in the darkness. For
Was
hours.
there an actual house that like turned its lights on? Okay.
As soon as he thinks this, he looks out, there's a little farmhouse out there and the light turns on. For hours I stood hacking at the icy ground. The guard passed by, insulting me, and once again I communed with my beloved, his wife, in his mind. More and more I felt that she was present, that she was with me. I had the feeling that I was able to touch her, able to stretch my hand out and grasp hers. The feeling was very strong. She was there. Then, at that very moment, a bird flew down silently and perched just in front of me on the heap of soil which I had dug up from the ditch and looked steadily at me. And he didn't know where his wife was. His wife got taken to a different camp and she most likely was killed. And that's why I think she was actually there. And he felt her there. Um, and you know, perhaps that bird was, you know, it was a hint from heaven. It was sent there to comfort him. And I love that the farmhouse light just turns on and he's completely surrounded by darkness, and he's reminded that he needs to be a light. um, Really amazing.
I just think of again, when you put into perspective like God's plan and everything, it when you really think about it, nothing is menial in his plan. And so I think that, you know, like, because like that person that turned that light on, they probably have no idea
They're
that
probably
they
just
are,
needing a tool and they just flip the light on, you know.
or they're taking a dump, like, you know, like they
Yeah.
have no idea
Yeah.
that they're even like a part of this spiritual experience for another person, you know. Like they could even be like fighting with their wife, like just like crazy, like not even something good, but God is just so amazing in his whole plan of like everything is just perfectly lined up, everything makes sense, everything is, you know, divinely orbiting so that, you know, that the most can be taken out of every experience, even in like you said, like a horrible, like horrific, worse than nightmares type of situation, that the best can be taken out of it. And so I think like for me it just is like, you know, obviously you don't need to get like super like crazy or obsessive over like the little things, like, "Oh, I need to turn on my light right now." Like obviously that's not what God, you know, needs
Yeah.
you to do, but it puts into perspective like every little thing I do, you know, like we talked about Jackson Maddie, like posts that you put on your stories or people that you text, you know,
Mm.
just out of the blue, or saying hi to someone at the grocery store, like none of those things are menial, you know. And so like I think that when you hear those stories and things like that, it makes you want to again continue to look out. But it's like I want to be, for me, I have more motivation in wanting to be a part of someone else's than having those experiences for myself. Like for me, I find a lot more fulfillment when I'm able to be the person that turns on the light, or I'm the person that, you know, is able to save bread for someone, you know, like things like that. And so for me it's kind of like a reminder to be like, you know, don't take for granted, you know, some of these little things that for someone else could be a really big deal.
Yeah, 100%. And he actually talks about that idea of transcending yourself is where fulfillment's going to come. I mean, we read that Christ taught that, you know, that when you lose yourself serving others and serving God, which that's how you serve God, is by serving others, then you will ultimately find yourself and find your purpose. And everyone's purpose is a little bit different. And I'll get into that. But there's one more thing I want to say, talking about bringing up the point, or one thing I want to read, one paragraph, talking about this idea of light shining in the darkness.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so this is just a brief story he tells. Okay. So he sets this up. Let's see. He's talking to this lady. Okay. So he witnessed the death of this woman in one of the camps. He says, "There's little to tell, and it may sound as if I had invented it, but to me, it seems like a poem." And so this is a true experience he had. This woman knew that she would die in the next few days, but when I talked to her, she was cheerful in spite of this knowledge. She said, "I am grateful that fate has hit me so hard. In my former life, I was spoiled and did not take spiritual accomplishments seriously." Pointing through the window of the hut, she said, "This tree here is the only friend I have in my loneliness. Through that window, she could see just one branch of a chestnut tree, and on the branch were two blossoms. I often talk to this tree, she said to me. I was startled and didn't quite know how to take her words. Was she delirious? Did she have occasional hallucinations? Anxiously, I asked her if the tree replied. Yes. What did it say to her? She answered, It says to me, I am here. I am here. I am life, eternal life. And
We've heard that one before.
yeah, um, that one hit me hard because, I know who the tree is. And it's just, this is human history's had a lot of dark moments and always will continue to have those. And this is one of the darkest, at least in our recent history. And for her to still have an experience like that, it just shows that the darkness, no matter how strong or thick or imminent it might seem, it still can't completely get rid of the light. It just cannot.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but like, I look back at some of the hardest times, whether it's on my mission or before my mission or, currently, a lot of the times that's where some of the more spiritual experiences happen. Like I remember like the hardest transfer on my mission, I also had the like still to this day the most spiritual experience of my life. And so it's like you look at it and it's like we know the principle that light is more powerful than darkness. If you're in a dark room and a light switches on, light floods everything. Like light is more powerful than any darkness. And so unless it's the 3 days of darkness when Jesus comes back, then that I don't even know how that works. But anyways, but it's kind of it puts into perspective to be like how important it is to have light in your life, whether it's like a tree, whether it's a friend, whether it's a spouse, whether it's, a book, whether it's even like a TV show or a video game, like whatever it might be, like just trying to find ways to bring light into your life because it is so powerful. And it's like you look at people that don't have a lot of light in their lives and it's like, yeah, that would be pretty tough because it keeps you going. And so I don't know, that's just kind of what comes to my mind is how important it is to find light in your life, whether like even like it's a freaking tree, like it is literally just a tree,
Yeah.
but to her it's something that brings light. And so however menial it might seem, like for me, I find a lot of joy in shoes or like whatever it might be. And so like even if it's something like silly like that, it's like find light, find joy in your life, because without it life gets pretty meaningless pretty quickly.
Yeah. And before I jump into kind of the main point of this book, that principle is in 12 Rules for Life, which is this one. And anyways, the last rule 12 and 12 Rules for Life is pet a cat on the street when you see one. And he opens up the chapter by saying dogs will work too. And then he tells the story of how I can't remember. He's lived in a lot of different places in Canada, but I think this is in his Toronto home. One of his neighbors has this cat that just kind of wanders the street. And he's like, typically, like my wife and I would go on walks with our kids, and the cat never would let you pet it. It would just run away. And then he said but every once in a while, it would follow us, get kind of close to us. And then if we stopped, it would come up to us and let us pet it. And that meant a lot to be able to pet that cat. And he talks about the story, and he said the principle is when life gives you a cat to pet, pet it. It means that there's going to be little tiny joys that are along the way, these little things that if you're grateful for, these tiny little moments, it just brings so much joy into life. And it's in those tiny little simple things, and I try to always be vigilant to see seeing the cat on the street, that lets you pet it, so to speak. And so I think, that's a perfect
Yeah.
they tie right together. That's rule 12, man. But yeah, I really like that principle.
I think, and we talk about this a lot, when something is taken away from you, you're able to, like, when you get it back, or when you have those opportunities, it makes it a lot more meaningful. Like we've talked about, like with you being married, like you, like literally, like as a missionary, like you would do anything to be able to, like, fast forward to the moment where you're married
Yeah.
and you get to, like, just go sleep in the same bed as your wife. Like you would give anything. And so then when you're, like, looking back on it, like when you're in your situation now, you're married, it's like it's like, obviously I'm sure, like, you can speak more to this, but it's probably easy to, take that for granted and just be
Very
like, yeah, like
easy.
whatever, like I'm just sleeping next to my wife. But then it's like, when you kind of have this perspective of, like, gratitude and looking for light and trying to enjoy every moment and every little tender mercy, it's like, holy cow, like how meaningful is this moment that I'm able to just, lay next to my wife. Or, like, as a missionary, like listening to music, like you don't get to listen to Post Malone, or you don't get to listen to Drake, or whatever it
Yeah.
might be. And you come home, and when you're first listening to it, it's like so meaningful to be able to do that. And it's like, I think life, obviously, like not every single moment is going to be super meaningful and super, like, amazing, like emotional, crying, whatever. But it's like, you can have, like, a lot more gratitude. And I think about that all the time when I'm driving in my car listening to music. I'm like, man, I would have given anything to be able to just take a minute to listen to Logic's new song on my mission or whatever. And so, like,
Yeah.
I just really like that principle of just, like, enjoying the moment for what it is. Because, like, in a year from now, you're gonna wish you could be back in this situation in this moment right now. Or in the past, you're like, man, I can't wait till I'm 21 and can, live on my own, whatever it might be. And it's like, just if you enjoy the moment for what it is, I think that's where you find a lot of peace and a lot of purpose. Because it's like, you're not looking forward to the future, you're not, like, focusing on the past, you're going to make the most of it. And then when you're thinking about the past, or you're looking towards the future, you're going to know you made the most of that moment, and then you can have peace of mind. And so for
Mm-hmm.
me, like, I just really like thinking of that principle, trying to make the most of every moment.
100%. Totally agree. Um, Now to get more into what the book is about. How do you have meaning in a concentration camp? And basically, in short, it's having an aim, and everyone's aim will be different because we're all different. He likened it to it's like you or me go up to a chess master and we say, "Hey, what's the best chess move in the game?" He's like, "Well, it depends who the personality of the person I'm playing. It depends what move I'm on. It depends where all the pieces are. It's completely subjective and dependent on the current circumstance. And everyone's circumstance of life and their experience is completely different. And so therefore everyone's aim will be different in some way. And so he talks about how two of the main things that sustained him. I mentioned how he had that, he was working on logotherapy, and he had written this manuscript that was going to be published, and he was going to start publishing books on his work. And when he got to the camp, he had the manuscript. He took it with him in his pocket, and the guards took it from him. And he said one time he was just realized he was feeling so meaningless. He felt he was becoming nihilistic, and he had some paper and a pen or pencil, and he
Real
started.
quick, what does nihilistic mean?
Nihilism is you believe there's no purpose or meaning to
Okay.
this life, and nihilism is on the upward slope, especially in the Western world, um, because if if there's no God and there's no deep religious meaning to this life, then what are you left with? Might as well just kill yourself, because why else? Why else stay here? Life is suffering. Like, life has suffering built into it, and you're not going to get away from that. And so if you believe there's no meaning to the suffering, then why endure it any longer? Why not just go kill yourself? And that's what tons of people are doing, whether they're explicitly killing themselves with a gun or hanging or pills, or, and this is a really heavy subject and it's really kind of difficult to talk about it. It's touchy, but whether they explicitly do it or they just completely lose meaning in their lives, that their body just starts to give up, and they unconsciously start to form habits like drug abuse or overeating, which creates disease, things like that. And so that's why I wanted to share this quick story. I'm not going to read it in here, but share
Well,
this.
real quick, I think
Yeah.
if anyone listening, is kind of at that point, it's I kind of, feel the call to action where it's like, you might not feel that this meaning right now, you might not feel that there's a whole lot of purpose. And if you're kind of at that point, it's kind of like, just take like, obviously you might not feel that at this point, but me and Reiss know that there is meaning. We know that there is purpose. And so it's kind of like, trust us, take our word for granted for just a little bit. Like, obviously, like, we don't want like people, like, we don't, like, nobody should take their own life type of deal. Like, yeah, you were just explaining like how, like, if that's the case, like, yeah, like I would, that's kind of what the steps lead to.
If
Like, all
you
right, suffering, boom, boom,
100%
boom.
like truly believe that there was no meaning to this life and that your suffering was all in vain, why would you endure anymore?
Right. It's like that's kind of like the logical, that view of thinking, that's the logical kind of steps. But I kind of just like the call to action is be like just trust us, just keep going, and we promise you that there is more meaning and stuff in this life. So I just wanted to like Elder Holland's like, just lean on my testimony for a little bit. It's
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
like kind of like the same thing where it's like, obviously we're not like impossible or whatever, but it's like, just trust us, just lean on our beliefs for now. We promise you guys that at some point you will be able to find that higher meaning and that higher purpose, because there isn't just suffering in this life, there is higher purpose and meaning. So
Yeah, and there's yeah, I'm glad you said that. And there is meaning. Your suffering is not in vain. It is meaningful. The Lord will consecrate thy afflictions. And I'll just kind of breeze through this story real quick, but he said that I once had a dramatic demonstration of the close link between the loss of faith in the future and the dangerous giving and this dangerous giving up. He had a friend. He doesn't say his name in here. It just says the letter F with a line. So probably Frank or something.
Franz.
Probably Franz. Anyways, he said my senior block warden, a fairly well-known composer, and uh, he confided in me one day and said, I would like to tell you something, doctor. By the way, Viktor Frankl was a doctor in one of the camps, was a doctor, but he explained it as, I was in one of the huts with tons of typhus patients, and the guards would bring us some aspirin, and they would give me like 4 tablets of aspirin that I had to disperse between 50 people. And that was the medicine. That's all they gave us. And the people who were really ill, we didn't give it to them because they were going to die. And the people who were kind of ill, we didn't give it to them. So we'd give it to the middle section, and we'd give a person like an eighth a piece of aspirin, but it doesn't do anything. So that was him as a doctor and moving dead bodies. It's like, anyway, so his senior block warden's talking to him, and he says, I've had a strange dream. A voice told me that I could wish for something, that I should only say what I wanted to know, and all my questions would be answered. What do you think I asked? That I would like to know when the war would be over for me. You know what I mean, doctor? For me, I wanted to know when our camp would be liberated and our sufferings come to an end. And when did you have this dream? I asked. In February 1945, he answered. It was then the beginning of March. What did your dream voice answer? His friend whispered to him, March 30th. When my friend told me about his dream, he was still full of hope and convinced that the voice of his dream would be right. But as the promised day drew nearer, the war news which reached our camp made it appear very unlikely that we would be free on the promised date. On March 29th, my friend suddenly became ill and ran a high temperature. On March 30th, the day his prophecy had told him that the war and suffering would be over for him, he became delirious and lost consciousness. On March 31st, he was dead. So, therefore, his prophecy was fulfilled. But his point was, and the paragraphs that follow that story, he talks about how as soon as he lost hope and faith for the future, then his immune system just completely shut down, and he literally died within 48 hours. He went from not ill, obviously not healthy, but not ill, to a dead man. And so this is where in the part of the book where he starts to introduce the principle of having an aim in life. So having something that you're working towards in the future, and then taking responsibility to get to that aim. And whether that's responsibility, one, you need to have responsibility for yourself, take care of yourself and whatnot, but also for, you know, your wife, your kids, your parents, your friends, your loved ones that you need to be taken care of. So this is where this idea is introduced. And so one thing that got him through this was his aim of wanting to publish his work on logotherapy. And so he started having little glimpses come up in his mind of parts of his manuscript, and he would jot down a bullet point, and he would collect the papers that he would jot down the bullet points. And he said, when I get out of this camp, I'm going to finish my book. And he said that sustained him, that kept him going. Also thinking about his wife, he says, kept him going. And so finding your purpose and your meaning, and then working towards that aim and taking responsibility. So and that's what can happen. That's a dramatic story of what can happen when you lose.
Right.
But that's what happens in principle to anyone who completely loses faith in the future.
Well, I mean, like, I just think about in our time that we served together, like how many people we would knock on their door, they have no meaning, they just have health problem after health problem after health problem, where their lives are falling apart. They just, it's like they can never seem to catch a break, like their house is a mess, like just like thing after thing after thing. And it's like they didn't have any aim whatsoever. Like their aim was literally to make it through the day. And for some people that maybe is a good enough aim. I don't. I think it probably needs to be a little bit more eternal than that. But it's a very real thing. Like their aim was very very low, and you saw the results of that. And it's just like, and it's kind of sad that that's kind of what starts to happen. But then it also then reinforces the importance of having a high aim, because it's like, all right, if my aim is high, my body will be able to try and shoot for that. My mind will be able to try and shoot for that. And that's not saying that you're not going to have health problems or
Yeah,
things like that. But
you're not going to have perfect health, but
no, that's just what I'm
yeah.
just thinking of like 2 or 3 like
Yeah.
people that we met, and it's just like, yeah, that's 100% true.
Yeah, 100%. And just real fast, this is about suffering. They must not lose hope, but should keep their courage in the certainty that the hopelessness of our struggle did not detract from its dignity and its meaning. I said that someone looks down on each of us in difficult hours, a friend, a wife, somebody alive or dead, or a God, and he would not expect us to disappoint him. He would hope to find us suffering proudly, not miserably, knowing how to die. So the question that came to my mind when I read that was how would God want you to suffer? Or how would you say your mother's dead and you're having a hard time? How would my mother want me to suffer right now? Would she want me to be playing the victim and just, woe is me, my life sucks, I'm so oppressed by life and whatever? Or would she want you to stand up to it and learn from it and move forward, And so obviously easier said than done. That's why most
Right.
people
Yeah.
in the concentration camps did not do this. But he said if only one person did it in the concentration camps, that's enough evidence to prove that it's possible. And obviously more than one person did it. A lot of people did it in the concentration camps.
I think one thing, like, I have it written, it's on my vision board, but also by my study desk, where it asked me what would my wife and kids want me doing right now. And for me, that is like like, even just as you were talking, thinking about it, like just being like open, like being single sucks. Like, it is literally the hardest thing I've ever had to go through. And it's like I feel like I'm just suffering like every day. And so, like, for me, like when you ask that, it's like, how would my kids want me to be, quote unquote, suffering right now? Would they want me to just be like, I'm just gonna give up? Because sometimes I just want to just be like, this is stupid, I'll just be a bachelor. But then it's like, how would my wife want me suffering right now? Or how would my kids want me to do this? And so it's just like, for me, like even on my mission, like that was a huge motivator. Like, I have that written on my wall on a post-it note, like, what would your wife and kids want you to be doing right now? And it's like, obviously being a baller missionary.
Yeah.
And so, like, kind of the same principle comes into my mind of like, as I'm going through this time in my life that might be a little bit harder. It's like, how would my wife and kids want me going through it? And it's like, obviously, like, they know like it's hard and stuff like that, but I think they would want me to be doing my part and to not give up. And so like just even like having that thought, even like even if you don't ever end up having any kids, like even just having like that thought of like someone in the future, even your future self, like what would your future self want you
Yeah.
to be doing right now? Like it just gives you a lot more meaning, and it gives you a little bit of motivation. And so for me, that's like a huge thing. But also like I remember like it was probably like my third transfer on my mission. I was on an exchange with one of like the missionaries that you just like think is like next to Jesus, like where you're just like, this guy
Yeah.
is awesome. I remember we said like the prayer for the morning, and he was like, please bless that, any ministering angels that are interested in what we're doing today will help us. And I
Mm.
was like, dude, what the crap are you talking about? Like, I was like, this dude's praying for angels. Like, what the heck? And so, like, we were talking about it, and like, obviously, like, as you read into the scriptures more, you learn how big of a role angels play
Mm-hmm.
in your day-to-day life. And so like for me, that's been kind of cool. And like we've had experience where it's like consecrating our apartment or things like that, where you feel people's spirits being there or whatever. And so like anyways, just like that principle of being able to pray for whatever angels are interested in what you're doing right now, to help them like give you strength or to help you out. Like for me, that like changed my life, because now it's like that could be the people you were going out trying to find and teach. That could be your wife. That could be your kids. That could be great grandparents that have, like whatever it might be. And so for me, like that's been a huge like thing that I try and pray for often. It's like I don't know. Like for me, that was a huge like perspective changer when I figured out that you could like pray to have ministry angels help you
Yeah.
out a little bit.
Yeah. Definitely, man. Um, I guess to kind of start wrapping up, here's what I kind of wanted to say about ideology. So he's talking about, this is towards the end, and he's just talking about some stories of guards that helped him out and stories of fellow prisoners who sabotaged tons of people for their own good. And he said, it is apparent that the mere knowledge that a man was either a camp guard or a prisoner tells us almost nothing. Human kindness can be found in all groups, even those which as a whole it would be easy to condemn. The boundaries between groups overlapped, and we must not try to simplify matters by saying that these men were angels and that those were devils. Certainly, it was a considerable achievement for a guard or foreman to be kind to the prisoners in spite of all the camp's influences, and on the other hand, the baseness of a prisoner who treated his own companions badly was exceptionally contemptible. Obviously, the prisoners found the lack of character in such men especially upsetting, while they were profoundly moved by the smallest kindness received from any of the guards. I remember how one day a foreman secretly gave me a piece of bread, which I knew he must have saved from his breakfast ration. It was far more than the small piece of bread which moved me to tears at the time. It was the human something which this man also gave to me, the word and look which accompanied the gift. And then he says, from all this, we may learn that there are two races of men in this world, but only these two, the race of the decent man and the race of the indecent man. Both are found everywhere. They penetrate into all groups of society. No group consists entirely of decent or indecent people. In this sense, no group is of pure race. And therefore, one occasionally found a decent fellow among the camp guards. I don't need to expound on that anymore. He says it all, unless you have anything to say on that.
No, I mean, I just think that, in today's world, if you can understand that principle, it makes it a whole lot easier to have sympathy and empathy for everyone.
Yeah.
Because understanding, like, it's so easy. Like, I mean, President Oaks got up there in conference and was like, like you can't say that if someone believes this politically that they're like they shouldn't be able to be a member of the church. But how easy is it to say like, oh, if you believe this, like there's no way you're an active member of the church or whatever.
Yeah.
But anyways, it just like it just goes into my mind of being like, those overgeneralizations is really tough, and that's what the fruits of overgeneralizing and putting people into groups is like genocide
Yeah.
genocide. And so for me, like it kind of goes back to like why I'm so passionate about the things that we talk about, like how when we overgeneralize cops, or we overgeneralize black people or white people or gays or straights, like
Or
whatever, like,
liberals.
or liberals or conservatives or vaccinated
Exactly.
people and not vaccinated people,
Yeah.
like when we do this, like this is why I'm so like passionate about these principles that we talk about, that the overgeneralization is called politics, like that's why me and you are so passionate about it, because we know what happens when it's when it starts to happen, and it's scary when it starts to happen. But anyway, so that's just kind of like my thoughts, is like this is like that kind of like summarizes why like we feel so passionate about some of these things, is because of the negative outcomes that can happen. And like I don't know, at least for me and you, I feel like a big part of why we did this is because we want to try and help people so that we can do our part to not let that happen.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. This is kind of, I want to finish with this story, and then we can kind of wrap up with like, just kind of really pounding in like how important it is to take responsibility for your life, because that's where
Okay.
meaning is found. But this is, dude, this is insane, really beautiful. So stage 3 is the liberation. So he tells the story of when it was actually the Americans who liberated his camp that he was in, because all the allies were liberating camps, like Britain liberated a few and whatnot, but America came to liberate his. And he said the guards, so pathetic. He said when the Americans were pulling up, a Red Cross truck was coming in, to offer first aid, and the guards were in civilian clothes, and they were giving the prisoners hot tea and bread and stuff, and he's just like, so fake. They're trying to put their pretty face on because they know that the Americans could just pop shoot him dead, and so they're just like, oh hey, yeah, we're just helping him. And I thought that was pathetic. But so he talks about, I never thought about this, but he said the liberation was actually really, really, really hard on a lot of people, and actually made some prisoners more nihilistic, and made some prisoners very, 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 very resentful. Therefore, it made them bad people. Because he said he likened it to this. Imagine a diver dives, he's got his whole diving suit on, his pressure's equalizing, dives 100 meters down, and then say he just completely I don't even know what it's called, but depressurizes his suit, I guess, and 100 meters of water starts pushing down on him, all that pressure in one instant. He said that's exactly what it was like, versus him coming up slowly and
Yeah.
blowing
I
in his
mean,
ears every.
scuba diving, if you go down and you come up too fast, your lungs just like blow up, I
Yeah.
think. And so I can
Yeah.
imagine that could happen to some people in those
So
situations where you're so oppressed for so long, and then all of a sudden,
literally one night they're sleeping in camps for 3 years, and then the next day a Red Cross truck pulls in and they're free. And he said most of them had imagined what it would be like to be free for so long that when it actually came, it didn't feel real. And he tells this story. He says, during this psychological phase, one observed that people with natures of a more primitive kind could not escape the influences of the brutality which had surrounded them in camp life. Now, being free, they thought they could use their freedom, that is a big word, ruthlessly. There's like licentiously or something. Anyways, the only thing that had changed for them was that they were now the oppressors instead of the oppressed. They became instigators, not objects of willful force and injustice. They justified their behavior by their own terrible experiences. This was often revealed in apparently insignificant events. So here's the story I want to emphasize. Listen. A friend was walking across a field with me toward the camp when suddenly we came to a field of green crops. Automatically, I avoided it, but he drew his arm through mine and dragged me through it. I stammered something about not treading down the young crops. He became annoyed, gave me an angry look, and shouted, "You don't say, and hasn't enough been taken from us? My wife and child have been gassed, not to mention everything else, and you would forbid me to tread on a few stalks of oats?" Only slowly could these men be guided back to the commonplace truth that no one has the right to do wrong, not even if wrong has been done to them.
All of America needs to hear that. I mean, the
Just
whole
like
world.
listen to this. This guy was, and I know it's easier said than done, but it's like it, this man was just tortured for years, was on the brink of death for years. I think he was in there for 3 years between concentration camps. And he didn't even have to think about it. His character's so strong. He just saw, this is some farmer's oat field. We shouldn't walk through it. And he just turned to go around it. And his friend was trying to use his past oppression as an excuse to justify that. And it's not justifiable. It's no one has the right to do wrong. It's not cool. And so when I read that, I was like, holy crap, this guy is a saint.
Yeah.
Like,
No.
holy cow.
I mean, I think just in today's world, you can see how many people do that. They're like, well, because this happened to me or happened to my parents, and I get to act like this. And it's a sense of entitlement. It's a sense of, it's a taking a lack of responsibility for your own life. And obviously there are circumstances that are really hard, but you see people that come out of it like this man, where their character is so strong that they're able to overcome it and learn and continue to grow from it. So I don't have too much to say other than that phrase is sweet. So
I know, just like incredible. And then I guess just to kind of wrap up, I loved this. He's talking about responsibility, and he said, this is funny. Freedom, however, is not the last word. Freedom is only part of the story and half of the truth. Freedom is but the negative aspect of the whole phenomenon, whose positive aspect is responsibleness. In fact, freedom is in danger of degenerating into mere arbitrariness unless it is lived in terms of responsibleness. That is why I recommend that the Statue of Liberty on the East Coast be supplemented by a statue of responsibility on the West Coast, period. They go together. That's why this talk about rights, you're free to do this, you're free to do that, you're free to do this, and no talk of responsibility is quickly degenerating our freedoms, because responsibility is half of the truth. And some might argue it's the more important half of the truth, because freedom can't even be realized without responsibility. And so responsibility is huge. The more responsibility I take in my life, the more meaning I feel. And it does not make your life easier. In fact, it kind of makes it harder because, now I have to take care. And, Riley and I are going to have kids one day. And it's like our neighbors upstairs, they just had a baby 2 weeks ago, and they have a daughter who turns 4 on Monday. And I was talking to him yesterday, and he was with his 4-year-old daughter. And I asked her, "Are you liking your little brother? How's he doing?" And she said, "Good. He sleeps a lot." And then my neighbor said, "Yeah, he sleeps a lot during the day, but he's up all night." But he's living a meaningful life. He's not nihilistic at all, because he has a wife and 2 kids to take care of, and his wife isn't nihilistic at all, because she's taking care of these 2 children that she gave birth to and is raising. And their life would be a lot easier if they just were just never got married, and they were just kind of screwing around, and that would be easier for the time being. But we're not going for easy, we're going for meaningful. Mm-hmm. And so take more responsibility, and it starts with you, and it starts small. It just starts really small. Like, start taking more responsibility for your health. And if your eating habits are just absolutely horrific, then just start by saying, maybe I should just drink more water. So, and I say you're a person who has it, like I have a hydro flask, and say like you're used to just drinking 1 of these a day. It's like, well, I'm just going to start by drinking 1.5 or 2. And then once I get that down, then I'll drink a little bit more. And then maybe I'll stop eating Pop-Tarts for breakfast, and I'll eat a piece of toast. I mean, it's not the best option, but it's better. And so that's what we're going for, is just getting better, but start taking responsibility. For me, physical is a good place to start because it's tangible.
Yeah.
So cleaning your room is a good example, or maybe making your bed in the morning is just taking some responsibility. And so you can show yourself, okay, look, I took the responsibility to make my bed and I can see that I actually did it. And once you start getting a grasp on that, then you can start moving towards things that are a little bit more abstract, like taking care of relationships, which Tony Robbins, one of my favorite quotes from him is, the quality of your life is the quality of your relationships, because that's all life is it's our relationships. And so if you're having a crummy life, then most likely every relationship in your life sucks. And so taking care of relationships is a huge responsibility. And it's something that you don't often, it's not like I can see my bed is made, or I can, I can see the amount of water I'm drinking every day. It's like, no, you have to, it's harder to make sure a relationship is staying healthy. It takes effort. You have to text them, call them. How are you doing? You got to bring them stuff. You got to, take the responsibility. And once you start doing these things, what it is it's selfless, and you start to transcend yourself. Because when you're all in here, my life sucks, me, then your life does suck. And it is all about you. And that's not going to go anywhere. You're quickly going to lose meaning in life. So I have just been really practicing the idea of taking more responsibility, I would say, for the past year, because I read Jordan Peterson's book a year ago, and it's all about responsibility. Because he says, if more responsibility, more meaning, not easier. Forget that. Not happier. Forget that. More meaningful. And more responsibility, more meaning. And I've really put that to the test, and it's completely true. When I'm not taking responsibility for my body, my meaning goes a little bit down. When I'm taking responsibility for my body, it's harder to get out of bed and go to the gym every morning, but it's more meaningful. It's harder for me to constantly be making meals for Riley and I, and running to the grocery store and blah, 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 making sure we have everything. It's harder, but it's more meaningful. And I'll take meaning over easy and happy any day.
Yeah. No, I think just my last thought would be, just think about like basically what you said, the call to action to be, think about what's one thing you can do in your life to take a little bit more responsibility today, whether that's, like you said, making your bed or cleaning your room or your bathroom, like whatever it might be. Like just find like one thing that you can do, and just do that today. Do it right now, like, or whatever it might be. And so I think that would be, my kind of call to action, myself included, continuing to find ways, because we can always do better.
Mm-hmm.
And so continuing to find ways to take responsibility so that you can have that meaning in your life. Because like you said, like we see it in the book, we see it in our own lives. When you have meaning, when you have an aim, it makes things a whole lot better. It's a lot, and it's better for everybody. So those are kind of my thoughts.
Yeah. Amen. Ditto. Take responsibility, start seeing the meaning. And my suggestion would be, and we can talk about this in a whole nother podcast one day, but life is suffering. Life will have suffering, but it doesn't have to have as much as you're probably experiencing right now, because you're probably doing things that's causing you to suffer in ways that are unnecessary. There's always, I believe truthfully, that there will always be some part of that. Every human has to go through suffering, but I feel like you're allotted suffering in a sense. It's kind of interesting to think about this way, but everyone will have to go through suffering. There's like mandatory suffering, and then there's suffering here that's caused by your poor habits. And if you would just stop doing these things that are causing the suffering, then you could just
the unnecessary suffering.
Yeah, get rid of the unnecessary suffering. He talks about it in this book too. He talks about how it's pretty much pathetic to be suffering unnecessarily, because you already have to suffer. You already have necessary sufferings that you're going to have to go through in this life. So why would you make it any worse for yourself? And so that's why self-help stuff, to me, it's often seen in a cynical light, and people often see it as kind of what's the word? Cynical.
Voodoo, moodoo.
You just weird. And it's like, no, the reason I love it so much is because it's not casual. It's this really deep philosophy. it's philosophical. It's this deep philosophy that I have, that if you, the self-help stuff is teaching me how to take more responsibility for my life, to limit the amount of suffering I have to go through in this life. It's getting rid of the unnecessary suffering so that I can have the energy to face the necessary suffering. And so I would encourage anybody to start getting into to spirituality and self-help, because it's not casual. From the outside, it can kind of seem like a cult, kind of cultish, or just like people are charlatans and stuff, but it's like, no, it's really a lot deeper than that. It's really about eliminating unnecessary suffering, learning how to take responsibility for your life so you can have the energy to show up for your necessary suffering. um, that's it, man.
Amen. Yeah, no, but thank you, Anderson Lindhardt Nation, for tuning in for another episode. This was a long one, a deep one, a little bit like emotionally draining a little bit because of some of the powerful principles that we talked about. But yeah, please let us know what you guys thought about, or if there's things that you want us to talk about or expound more on, whether it was in the book or maybe something that we just said. Please reach out to us. We say it every time. But if there's anything we can help you with, any way that we can support you, keep you accountable, whatever it might be, like, reach out to us. That's where we find a lot of joy and a lot of meaning. And so even if it's just to help us find meaning, to start with, we would appreciate it. But we hope that we care and love each and every one of you. So let us know if we can do anything for you guys. And we love you guys, and we'll see you next episode.
See ya. Love you.
Love you.
Bye.
Bye.